Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. My name is Leon Jones, and tonight I'm going to give you some politics and some education at the same time. And along with the politics, we'll get into some social issues, particularly about mindset of American people when it comes to entitlements like EBT. But first, I want to get into what a CR is. A CR is a continuing resolution. Now, for you individuals who don't know what it is, you hear the term on the news, it's basically what I call a stopgap. It's short term and it's funding to keep the government open. And right now, there is this quarrel going on between the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, I am on the Republican side because the Republicans don't want funding for illegal immigrants. And also, the Democrats allow the Obama tax cuts to expire. And right now, the Democrats want the president, and of course, they want the Republicans to actually sign up for giving illegals health care. Now, something that you must understand too when it comes to the EBT, I hear a lot of black women on these videos talking about what they're going to do to Trump when it comes to EBT, how strong and independent they are. Now, it's funny, they act like the EBT, which is your electronic benefits transfer, that's what EBT is. It's taken place for the what we used to call food stamps. And so you have a number of black women having kid after kid after kid, and they're talking about going in there and stealing if their EBT goes away. But again, when it comes to black people, they're very emotional. They have lead in their ass. Lead stands for lies, emotion, assumption, and deceit, delusion, and deception. I made that acronym up. Well, what they're not understanding is the illegals. The illegals were getting $13,000 worth of cash benefits and had hotels in some of the nice areas of the cities and in some of the black areas of the cities. But you must understand that the taxpayers are taking care of individuals who really don't work. This is why they insist on having child after child after child, and the cycle goes on. But when you're trying to threaten the president about taking away EBT and you are looking to go into these grocery stores and steal, well, what that's going to do is number one, it's going to get you put in jail. And number two, it's going to raise the prices of all of the groceries. Why? Because they have to make up for what was stolen. And this is why individuals don't understand why are groceries so high. Well, it just depends on what state you live in. I mean, I guarantee all the individuals voting for Mamdani in New York are going to get an idea of what high taxes are. But this all plays into the budget because the CR is a budget. It's what keeps the government open. Now, I want to share something with you. So I'm going to give you a good idea of what a CR is. Well, a CR is a temporary funding bill passed by Congress to keep the federal government operating when regular appropriations bills have not been passed by the October 1st deadline. Again, as I mentioned before, It provides a stopgap funding, typically based on the previous year's levels, for a basically a short, or we can say a specified period, but it's short, to avoid a government shutdown. Now, what you need to know is how it all works. Well, it works like this: you have temporary funding. Well, a CR is a joint resolution that provides budget authority to allow federal agencies to continue their operations until the annual appropriations acts are approved. And then there is funding level. And under funding level, it generally continues funding at the prior year's rate or a specified portion of it. Though sometimes it can be a scaled up percentage. It often includes anomalies, which are specific increases or decreases to certain programs. And then there's a duration, and that's the time period a CR, which again, if you're just joining, a CR is a continuing resolution. And under duration, it's a time period that a CR can cover. And the CRs also vary from a few days to a few weeks, months, or even entirely of a fiscal year. Again, it's days, weeks, and months, or an entire fiscal year that the duration of a CR can cover, which is a continuing resolution. Now, again, what is the purpose? Well, the main goal is to present a correction. The main goal is, well, I am giving you a presentation of what a CR is, but the purpose of the CR is basically to prevent a lapse in funding that would force a government shutdown, giving Congress more time to complete the regular appropriations process. Now, you see, we're in a government shutdown now, and they're talking about a CR now. Now, when it comes to the Democrats, the only Democrat right now that has the most sense, and I would even vote for this guy, even though he's a Democrat, is John Fetterman. Now, if you don't know who John Fetterman is, he was the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania. Now, Braddock, Pennsylvania, I used to live in Pennsylvania. It's just outside of Pittsburgh. And he had a stroke. But John Fetterman is the only Democrat making sense. And something else that's happening as well, the unions. There's a government union. Now, the government union, they want the Democrats to give in. Now, I'm going to say this right now. You have to be careful of some unions. Now, why does the Federal Employees Union want the Democrats to give in? Very simple. I have the answer for you. See, the unions are also a big machine, and the unions donate a lot of money to the Democratic Party. Well, here's the thing about the government employees. When they're not working, they're not getting paid, and the money isn't coming from the federal employees to the unions. Now, the unions make money off of membership. So this is why the federal government's union wants the Democrats to basically give in. Now, they're not going to give in, and it's going to hurt the Democrats. Again, the Democrats are the ones who are allowing the government shutdown. Now, getting back to the CRs, there are different types of CRs. Now, you have two types. You have a clean CR and a dirty CR. Now, basically, when a CR is clean, it's very simple, straightforward extension of the previous year's funding with no changes or additions to policy. Then you have what we call a dirty CR. And this one, and this is what we got going through right now. I believe it's a dirty CR because the Republicans are saying no to some things. And some of the things that the Republicans are saying no to, like health care for illegal immigrants, is that would be a definite no for me because these individuals who come over here are illegal. In fact, if you listen to the Democrats speak, they always refer back to slavery. Let me give you a case in point. And when it comes to black people, too, black people, this is where you don't understand history. Many of you get your information from shows like Roots. Roots wasn't even real. But you know, you had black slave owners as well. I know you hear Anthony Johnson. Now, Anthony Johnson was legally able to own slaves. But let me tell you where there are some black slaves today. Well, I know so many Arabs, and I did a video about this topic of roughly 4 years ago, where there were 400 African slaves over in the Arabian areas. And black people weren't the only slaves. We had Indians who were slaves. You look at some of the Mexicans, they've been slaves. You look at Irish people, they've been slaves. In fact, there really is no difference between what the white people call slaves and what black people call slaves. A slave is a slave in my book, indentured service. Well, see, what the Democrats really want, they want slavery. This is why they want to use the immigrants. I mean, their whole argument is who's going to clean our toilets? Who's going to do our grass? Who's going to cook our food? Well, if you think about it, that's just like slavery. And see, that's what the Democrats aren't telling you. The problem with the Democrats, particularly the white liberals, is they think they are so above everybody else that they believe that everybody else is beneath them, but they're showing that they care for the minorities that they, in their mind, believe are beneath them. And they, in their minds, the white liberals have the magic potion to try to lift everybody up to be on their level. But if you really think about it, these white liberals don't give a damn about anybody but themselves. In fact, these white liberals think they are superior to everybody. And that includes some of their own white folk. Because every time you hear them talk, like if it's a black person who is conservative leaning, that white liberal is going to call that black person a coon. In fact, it is not any surprise that you don't hear the white liberal call black people who vote against the narrative of the Democratic Party Uncle Tom, because they have done it. But again, you have a number of black people who don't understand this. And you look at Martin Luther King. And I did a video a while back when he talked about the fist. Well, if you look at the Black Panther movement, if you look at any other of the black nationalist movements, they're all communist movements. The Black Fist is communist. We all know Martin Luther King. He was communist. And the reason why he spoke so well, because he was the pretty boy of the communist white folks. And this is all true. You can look it up for yourself. You had people like Reverend Wright. He didn't say, God bless America. He said, God damn America. It's in the Bible. That's that communist thinking. A lot of your black pastors are communists. In fact, you have a lot of communist talking people and they don't even know they're communists. And this is really what the protests are about. They want communism in this country because they believe communism equals everything. But because they don't understand history, you know who's done a lot of killing? People like Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, Mussolini. These are all communists. You even have China. China is still a communist country. Venezuela, Cuba. But you have a number of these individuals, particularly black people, love communism. And they don't even know what communism is. And the bottom line, it's just not black people. It's just a lot of people in this country do not know their history. The Ku Klux Klan was basically set up to basically get rid of Republicans. And it's the Democrats who held up the Civil Rights Act. There was going to be a Civil Rights Act, and Lyndon B. Johnson chaired it along with, well, he didn't want it. This is when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president in 57, but nobody knows that. And the only reason why it basically passed in 65, it's because, the senator always comes and goes out of my mind when it comes to the presidential election of 1964. Broadwater, I can't remember his name, but he was a senator. And I'm going to tell you what they used. They used Brown versus Board of Education. And I know it had water in it. Anybody in the comment section, let me know what that or who he really was. I mean, he was a senator until 1986, and what he did, he talked about the Brown versus Board of Education, and what Lyndon B. Johnson did, he used that as a racial issue. But all he said was, well, we should not get involved in a state matter. And see, that ignited black people, because black people in the 50s were Republicans. In fact, if you really think about this, during the Jim Crow, black people did do well for themselves. But here's what I'm going to say about that. When it comes to black people, they wanted to integrate into white establishments. First of all, if somebody doesn't want me in their establishment, I'm not going to go into their establishment. And black people had their own, but see, they wanted to go over there with the white folks because you remember something, they did rebuild Black Wall Street, but they weren't supporting black businesses. And one of the issues with black people is they have a crabs in a barrel mindset and they do not know anything about politics, but many of them, they continue to vote Democrat. They continue to vote Democrat and it's not serving them well. You have, and this is particularly a number of the baby boomers, some Gen Xers, and even some silent generation individuals. But going back to the EBT, well, it's funny how a number of women say they are independent, strong. And this basically comes from black women. Well, here's the thing about this. If you're so strong and independent, why are some of you depending on EBT for food? People who are strong and independent can go get their own food. You see, the entitlements, that is not your money. And when you are getting entitlements, you're going to have to understand that. And this is why it goes right into the continuing resolution. There are programs that are going to get cut. Now, we're going to see what happens on November 1st. But I just want to shine a light by adding some social issues into the mix because there are just a number of people out here who don't understand how polling works. They don't understand how continuing resolutions work. They really don't understand how the political process works. This is why they listen to all of the news outlets. And the news outlets are doing nothing but lying. They're getting them emotional. They're making a lot of assumptions, and they're also delusional, deceit, and deception. And that's generally the low information or the no information type of people. But let's move on. I'm going to get into a PowerPoint about the continuing resolution. And again, the continuing resolution in a nutshell. So, when we talk about continuing resolution in general, Appropriation Act that provides budget authority for federal agencies, specific activities, or both to continue in operation when Congress and the President have not completed action on the regular appropriation acts by the beginning of the fiscal year. Now, the content of a continuing resolution is, well, you have general provisions that apply to all appropriations covered by the CR, and you have anomalies that apply to single accounts and typically deviate from some form of the general provisions. Now we're going to get into the general provisions. So, Scope Section 101, which bills specified and the funding level, rate for operations. So, the following sums are hereby appropriated out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated for the several department agencies, corporations, and other organizational units of government for the fiscal year and for other purposes, namely Section 101. A. Such amounts as may be necessary at a rate for operations as provided in the applicable appropriations acts for fiscal year and under the authority and conditions provided in such acts for continuing projects or activities that are not otherwise specifically provided in this act. They were conducted in fiscal year and for which appropriations funds or other authority were made available in the following appropriations acts. Now, the extent and manner, Section 103. Appropriations made by Section 101 shall be available to the extent and in the manner that would be provided by the pertinent Appropriations Act. Termination date, Section 106. Unless otherwise provided for in this Act or in the applicable Appropriations Act for the fiscal year, appropriations and funds made available and authority granted pursuant to this Act shall be available until whichever the following first occurs: the enactment into law of an appropriation for any project or activity provided in this Act, and the enactment into law of the applicable Appropriations Act for the fiscal year without any provision for such project or activity. Now, I'm giving it to you plain and simple. This is what everything says. Now, you have what we call general provisions accounting. So, as you know, continuing resolutions deal with budgeting. So, the coverage of CR obligations, Section 105. Appropriations made and authority granted pursuant to this Act shall cover all obligations or expenditures incurred for any project or activity during the period for which funds or authority for such project or activity are available under this Act. So we have adjustment of accounts, Section 107. Expenditures, and that's expenditures made pursuant to this Act, shall be charged to the applicable appropriation fund or authorization whenever a bill in which such applicable appropriation fund or authorization is contained and enacted into law. Then we have the execution, the general provisions execution. So it just says in section 104, no new starts, except as otherwise provided in section 102. No appropriation or funds made available or authority granted pursuant to section 101 shall be used to initiate or resume any project or activity for which appropriations, funds, or other authority were not available during the fiscal year. So that means if you don't have it, really, you can't enact any program if you really don't have any money. And that money carries over from the previous year. That's exactly what it's saying. So, in other words, they cannot initiate any new programs or resume any products or projects or activities when they don't have any authority or appropriated funds. And those funds were available during the fiscal year. And that's this fiscal year. Now, if you don't know what a fiscal year is, a fiscal year, there are different types of fiscal years. The federal fiscal year goes from October 1st to September 30th. Now, you also have states have their own fiscal years. I know in Pennsylvania, their fiscal year starts July 1st to June 30th. And I believe it's the same way here in Indiana. So what we're dealing with is budgets and appropriating funds for different programs. Now, limiting actions. This is section 108. Appropriations made and funds made available by or authority granted pursuant to this act may be used without regard to the time limitations for submission and approval of apportionments set forth in section 1513 of Title 31. And you also have limitation for high initial rate of distribution, section 109. So basically, it's stating, notwithstanding any other provision of this act except section 106 for these programs that would otherwise have high initial rates of operation or complete distribution of appropriations at the beginning of the fiscal year because of distributions of funding to states, foreign countries, grantees, or others. Such high initial rates of operation or complete distribution shall not be made, and no grants shall be awarded for such programs funded by this act that would impinge on the funding pejoratives. And we have apportionment timing. The act shall be implemented so that only the most limiting funding action of that permitted in the act shall be taken in order to provide for continuation of projects and activities. And this right here is breaking everything down on what is involved in a continuing resolution. And we have the furlough. Now, when we talk about furlough, this is where we start to get into the federal employees. So, and this is stating amounts made available under section 101 for civilian personnel compensation and benefits in each department and agency may be apportioned up to the rate for operations necessary to avoid furloughs with such department or agency consistent with the applicable Appropriations Act for the fiscal year, except that such authority provided under this section shall not be used until after the department or agency has taken all necessary actions to reduce or defer non-personal related administrative expenses. Now, basically, it does allow payment within such department or agency. Now, it has to be, again, applicable with the Appropriations Act for that fiscal year. Now, it should not be used, however, after the department or agency has taken any type of action to reduce or defer non-personal related administrative expenses. Now, here are the CR anomalies. What if the agency cannot operate under the typical CR parameters? Well, last year's funding level may or may not include supplemental funding. Last year's authority, no new starts. Is that authority expiring? So what happens if they cannot operate under the typical parameters? The agency basically proposes a continuing resolution anomaly for legislative consideration. And this is where you start to get into the House and the Senate. So the problem, an agency cannot operate under last year's funding level for the period of the CR. Solution, what they're going to do is provide a different funding level for the period of the CR. So let's give a quick example. Section 101, notwithstanding section 121, this is right, this is section 121, notwithstanding section 101, amounts are provided for Department of Commerce, Bureau of the Census, periodic census and programs at a rate of operations, or rate for operations, roughly around, I'm going to say, you have 9 zeros here, $7 billion. Let's say fiscal year 2010. That's an example. So what happens is, what happened then? Well, an agency did not have authority to operate a program last year or the authority to operate the way it would wish to this year. So solution, you have to provide authority to operate the program during the period of the CR. Now, again, the period of the CR is a short-term resolution. Now, here's another example, section 157. Amounts provided by section 101, Department of Health and Human Resources, Office of the Secretary, General Department Management are also available for the purpose of funding the National Commission on Children in Disasters authorized under Title VI of Division G of the Public Law 110-161. That's Title VI Commission, fiscal year 2009. Now, again, these are examples. I'm showing you how it works. Now, here's the problem. An agency's authorization will expire during the period of the CR. And then what happens if it expires? I'll have to go ahead and do another one. Again, this is a short-term fix. Now, the solution, you have to provide authority to operate the program during the period of the CR, and that's notwithstanding the expiration. So the question is the authorization a term and condition of last year's funding? Well, here's what we got. Well, let's go back for a moment here. Now, this also, as we go, before I go on to the next slide, it includes those authorization provisions typically included in appropriations acts, as well as those authoritarian provisions typically included in authorization acts. That's authorization acts. So here's a flow chart. Terms and conditions, T and C. That's why it matters. Is it a T and C? Well, yes or no. Anomaly sought. No anomaly needed. If it's yes. All right, no, anomaly enacted. Don't seek anomaly. Well, under yes, program can continue under CR. No, but there's an anomaly enacted, so the program does continue under CR. And then if they don't seek an anomaly, the program terminates under CR. You see how all this works? See, when it's yes, everything goes smoothly. It's what we call a clean CR. But if it's no, it could be a dirty CR. Then this is where it gets murky, right here. How do we determine if it is a term or condition? Well, where's the authority for the program provided? All right. You have to read the flow chart here or the organizational chart. So you have the Appropriations Act and you have the Appropriations Law. Well, under the law, it's going to require further analysis. However, under the Act, it's either going to be no changes in underlying statute, the United States Code or Act, or there'll be changes in a U.S. Code, or likely terms and conditions requires further analysis, or likely not terms and conditions. But it also is going to require further analysis. So under the Act and under the law, the terms and conditions for the Act require further analysis. And if it's not terms and conditions, it's still going to require further analysis. And under the law, it requires further analysis. So basically, under the Act and the law, with the exception of one step, it's going to require further analysis. Now, OMB's automatic apportionment of short-term CRs. And this is what it looks like. So I'll blow it up for you. This is what it looks like. The heads of all the executive departments. Now, this is, of course, under 2011. This is what it says. This is what it says right here. And it's signed by the Deputy Director of Management. Automatic. Now, common CR questions received by both OMB and Treasury. What's the difference between a short-term and a long-term CR? What are exception apportionments? Are non-expenditure transfers covered under a CR? Are reprogrammings allowed under a CR? Common questions received by both the OMB. Now, what is OMB? That's the Office of Management and Budget and Treasury. So, will an appropriation warrant be processed during a CR? What types of appropriation warrants are processed during a CR? What should be reported in fax to? When is this CR recorded? Well, FMS appropriation warrant processed during a short-term CR. Okay, under a short-term CR, generally no appropriation warrants are processed. Exceptions include direct appropriations with the CR legislation. So, let me give you an example. Section 134, notwithstanding any other provision of this act, for payments in equal shares to the children and grandchildren of Robert C. Byrd, $193,400 is appropriated. FMS appropriation warrant processed during a full year CR. Under a full year CR, appropriation warrants are processed and issued based on the annualized level of funding. Now, note, determination of the analyzed level of funding is coordinated between FMS, OMB, and federal program agencies. Now, federal program agencies, however, must submit to FMS the following: the legislative authority, public law, account symbols for the current fiscal year and the amount for each account, contact person for additional information. And the appropriate official signature, the person authorized to request an appropriation under a continuing resolution. Common questions received by both OMB and Treasury. What USSGL account is used to record a CR? Account number 1090. Under 1090, the title is the fund balance with Treasury under a continuing resolution. So if you're going to go into government accounting, this is what you're going to get into. And a balance is a debit. The definition, the amount equal to the funding provided under a continuing resolution and a portion in accordance with the Office of Management and Budget's automatic apportionment bulletin. The balance in this account will adjust to zero when the U.S. Department of Treasury's Financial Management Services processes a warrant, and after the warrant is processed, then the account must adjust to zero by year end. So, posting logic for recording a CR. Example, annualized level of appropriation, 100,000. CR available for obligation, 5,000. So, let's look at this. So you have 4119 other appropriations realized, 100,000. 4450 unappropriate authority, 100,000. 1090 FBWT under a continuing resolution, 5,000. And 3101 unexpended appropriation received, 5,000. So record amount available from CR. This is when it goes to zero because the 5,000s will balance out. And what this is getting to is a lot of the accounting. Now, the record authority, temporary unavailable. So you have, right now, you have your 4450, other appropriations realized under 4395, authority unavailable pursuant to public law. Then you record a payment, 4802. Undelivered orders, obligations unpaid. 4902. Delivered orders, obligations paid. 6100. Operating expenses. 1010. Fund balance with Treasury. 3107. Unexpended appropriations used. 5700. Expended appropriations. And this is, again, when you deal with government, this is what the accounts will look like. And again, if you are in accounting and you're doing the government, you're going to be recording a lot of these entries. But this is what you don't see behind the scenes, because you have posting logic for recording a CR. And it has it right here. You adjust 1090 to zero. And that's what's happening here. You see where 4395 and 4450 are being adjusted to zero. And also 1010 fund balance. And then you have 1090 and 3101. You adjust everything to zero. And it's adjusted to zero by year's end. That means you're balancing your books. So common CR questions received by both OMB and Treasury. During a CR, should an anticipated appropriation be recorded? Do continuing resolutions apply to special or trust funds? Common CR questions received by both OMB and Treasury. So basically, if an agency continues to operate a program based on a previous year's budget authority, but there's no funding for the program, when the legislation is signed, is the federal government and or agency responsible for the obligations made? If so, what are the procedures for liquidating the obligations? Well, you can find that in OMB Circular A11, Section 123.13. Again, there's a lot of jargon. If you're not an accountant, you might not understand this. And here's some of the sources right here. OMB A11, Section 123 and Section 120 exhibits F, G, and H. And you have appropriations funded by a continuing resolution scenario. And you can find everything in this in these resources. Now, what does GAO stand for? That's the General Accounting Office. So when you deal with budgets, you're going to deal with the treasurer, you're going to deal with OMB, you're going to deal with the GAO. And then under the appendix, there's an appendix. So basically, this is your history of continuing resolutions. This is the overview. In fact, CRs date from at least the late 1870s and have been part of the regular appropriations process for more than 50 years. The exception of the 3 fiscal years, 1989, 1995, and 1997, at least one CR has been enacted for each fiscal year since 1955. So over the past 35 years, the nature, scope, and durations of CRs has expanded. So from the early 1970s to 1987, CRs expanded from interim funding measures, which are brief, to providing funding in lieu of appropriations bill through the end of the fiscal year. And in some cases, these measures include the full text of regular appropriations bills and or substantive legislation. And CRs are attractive vehicles for substantial or substantive legislation. It's substantive legislation because they are now considered must-pass legislation. Now, this is what's going on right now. And when we talk about legislation, that means it's in Congress. And in order to get a CR passed in Congress, yes, the House might put their bills up, their CRs up in the Senate. But here's the thing. It takes 60 senators. And I believe also the Democrats, they want in the filibuster. You don't want to end the filibuster because the filibuster gives the minority a little bit of power as well. This is what the checks and balances are. And see, the Democrats really don't want checks and balances. They want to enact what they want to. You know, just like drawing of the maps. Now, here in Indiana, Governor Brown is having a special election to redraw the maps. And I know the Democrats are trying to fight the Republicans, but they've been doing it. And see, when you don't understand what's going on out there, this is when you get snake bitten. And the Democrats have already redrawn their lines. I mean, I did a video on that. You look at Maryland and Massachusetts, you look at California, you look at Illinois. When you're a Republican, you're never going to win that state. And see, the Democrats don't want the Republicans to do that because it's going to take away power from the Democrats. And of course, I want people like Jasmine Crockett out of that. She's just no good. She's just not a good person. And again, here's the appendix of all of the continuing resolutions. So basically, just to give you an overview, when I talk about a review, the continuing resolution is basically a temporary funding bill passed by Congress to keep the federal government operating when regular appropriations bills have not been passed by the October 1st deadline. Now, what's October 1st? October 1st is the new fiscal year. That's on the federal level. Now, on the state level, it's July 1st. Remember that. People talk about fiscal year. Now, the fiscal year deals with budgets. It's not the same as the Gregorian year. And I don't know how many people would get that wrong. Well, I thought the year began January 1st. That is the Gregorian year. That is not the fiscal year. And again, The Gregorian year starts January 1st and ends December 31st. However, the state fiscal year starts July 1st and it ends June 30th. And the federal fiscal year starts October 1st to September 30th. You got to get educated on that. There are a lot of people that don't understand what's going on. And again, when we deal with the CR, if there's no appropriations bill passed by the October 1st deadline, then what happens? The CR is used to provide a stopgap bill or stopgap funding, typically based on last year's levels, and that's used to avoid a government shutdown. But apparently, that hasn't been working this year, and the government's been shut down for about a month. So, again, how it works, you have temporary funding, and that's where a CR is a joint resolution that provides budget authority to allow federal agencies to basically continue their operations until their annual appropriations acts are approved. Again, there's a funding level, and that also generally, I'm going to use the word generally, it generally continues funding at the prior year's rate or a specified portion of it. Though sometimes it could be a scaled up percentage, it often includes anomalies, which are specific increases or decreases to certain programs. Now, I bet you that's most likely going to happen to the EBT card program, because in order to get EBT cards, and a number of the black women are upset thinking that EBT is going to go away. No, they're trying to take it away from the illegals, and a number of black women don't understand that money that you're crying about, well, the taxpayers funded all the hotels and funded $13,000. I'm not talking about small change here, but these illegals were getting $13,000 EBTs. And you remember that EBT is just a benefit. And when you're on a government program, you don't have control of the money. The government has control of the money. And the government can halt that program at any time. This is why you need to understand how policies work. Many people don't understand how policies work, particularly black people. Black people get emotional, and you have some dumb white people out there too, particularly ones who are protesting. They don't understand what a king is. Trump is not a king. But when you hear them talk, they're talking like groceries are sky high. Well, here's the problem. A lot of Americans talk about change, but in retrospect, they want things to stay where they are because they're comfortable. See, change takes a little bit of pain, but Americans are too stupid, a number of them, too impatient, and too entitled to really look at change. They look at change as something that is an enemy. And what this president is doing, he's actually following the laws, but a lot of these politicians out here, a lot of these dumb people out here, they've been going at it, getting gravy for a long time. They don't want the gravy cut. This is why the Democrats are upset when drug boats get shot. Again, there was another one shot and killed 14 people. Well, some of the Democrats might be getting some funding from that, and some of the Republicans too. But you must understand, again, how the CR works. Of course, there's a duration. And, the duration period of time a CR covers can vary from a few days to a few weeks, months, or even an entitled fiscal year. Remember, this is what people have to understand. This is one of the most important parts, the duration. Duration, what is it? Is a time period. It's a time period that the CR can cover. So a CR can be short term or it could last a full fiscal year. Now, again, the main purpose of a CR is to prevent a lapse in funding that would force a government shutdown, giving Congress more time to complete the regular appropriations process. Well, the government is already shut down, so we're no longer dealing with the CR. Congress is now trying to complete the regular appropriations process. Well, of course, the Democrats, they want us to keep funding all of the illegal immigrants' health care. And it won't be too long before we see something about voting rights. And illegals should not have a right to vote. If you are not part of this country, you should not be allowed to play in any shape or any way in the political process. And again, going back to CRs, we have clean CRs. That's a simple, straightforward extension of the previous year's funding with no changes or additions to policy. And then we have dirty CRs. And that's a CR that policy writers or other politically motivated changes, and that has to do with funding levels. So there is the CRs, but you know, just attaching politics to everything. A number of people who don't understand politics, and it's just not. Again, I always talk about black people. Um, the thing about what's going on now, the black women, they've really allowed themselves to slide into feminism. Many of them, they want to rule the house, but they want to rule the house by getting government subsidies. Now, again, in the black community, the movements, and I will say this again, something that was not mentioned before. In fact, this is where Black Lives Matter, they got it from a program. It was a Marxist program by Martin Luther King. It never got off the ground, but if you look at that website, the Poor People's Campaign, and that was basically a Marxist movement. And when it comes to what's going on now, particularly a number of women, they're no longer talking about equality, they're talking about equity. And see, when you look at the individuals who were working the government programs, a number of individuals were women, particularly white women. But if I break it down into race and just dealing with blacks, it's the black women who had most of the government jobs. And the problem with the black woman is they actually were on some white supremacist shit by thinking they were better than black men. And now the chickens have come home to roost. Now, this is not a video to beat down on black women, but this is to make them realize that when you thought you were high and mighty, it's like you went up the ladder, you beat down on the brothers. Now the brothers, they've always been strutting along. They haven't had any programs that figured it out. Now, the only reason why they even follow a number of you sisters is so you can give them a piece of ass. That's it. Other than that, too many brothers have simped. But now, for the most part, they've figured it out. They figured it out through programs here on YouTube, programs that are educating them like mine and Angry Man's and even Ringo out there and Machismo TV. I mean, the mainstream media. The mainstream media is still sitting there lying. And there are just so many people in this country who don't know about history. Again, like the white liberal. See, the white liberal talks about white supremacy. And the reason why they talk about racism and white supremacy so much, when you talk about something so much, you're really trying to convince yourself that you're not racist. But when it comes to the white liberal, they are the most racist people because it's all they mention. Again, they call themselves trying to give us an education on how to become what they are because they think they're so much better than the people who they're trying to help. But the people who they're trying to help are too ignorant to see what's going on. And they think these so-called white liberals are on their side when all the white liberal is doing is using them as a buffer to continue their white supremacy. And the white liberal, they will go back and use the black leftists against people like me by calling me coons and sellouts. Why? Because they'd rather use somebody who looks like me so it doesn't make them look like they're the racist person, but it makes the buffer Negro appear that the buffer Negro is on the side of that white liberal. But that's what the white liberal wants. But the white liberal is basically controlling that Negro. But again, when it comes to blacks and whites in slavery, well, I can't fault every white person for what maybe 2 to 3% of white people did. I can't do that because most whites were not slave owners. But see, when you hear a number of blacks, and you have blacks out here who never even dealt with racism, they start talking about slavery. And see, that's the white liberal putting a battery in their back. They're repeating the talking points of the white liberal. The white liberal is the most racist out here. And what they will do is talk you to death to make you feel good. But in essence, the white liberal really thinks that the minorities are inferior. This is why, in their mind, they have to show you how to get where they are. When in essence, on one hand, they put up the guilt trip, and on the other hand, they have this white supremacist, so this superiority complex by putting all the minorities in inferior uh, in inferior places or inferior positions. But because you have a number of individuals who don't understand what's going on, they follow it. And that's what individuals do when it comes to Marxism and communism. They actually use divide and conquer. They make being successful very bad. First of all, when you're successful and you work hard at something, you figure everything out, you don't need government. Government is only there to protect your rights. But now today, government, you have a number of people who believe that government is there to give them stuff. Again, you look at all these liberals. When you give away everything, you end up bankrupting your state and your city. Now, if I'm Trump and you have a number of blue states who are defying the orders of the federal government because federal law trumps state law, I would withhold funding. Say, okay, Chicago, you don't want me to have the National Guard in there? So be it. Cut funding off. And going back to the EBT, there are a number of people on EBT. I think 44 million people on EBT. These are the people, you have some who need it, but you have a number of able-bodied people. And the problem is the able-bodied people, they believe that they can use that money to buy anything they want to. But remember, when you're getting government programs, the government controls it, not you. I mean, when you let the government in your education system, when you let them in your jobs, when you let the government in your life, you no longer have a life. And this is what communism is. Communism is basically the government running every aspect of your life. You get no say. Matter of fact, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. You cannot talk about the government. See, here's the problem with a number of these individuals. They're going out here talking about the president. But if these liberals went to any other country, talked about government in those other countries, from the type of government that they want, they'd be executed. But that is the problem. See, I believe in freedom of speech, but you have some people that really go about it the wrong way. And that creates lies, emotion, assumption, illusion, deceit, and deception. That's the problem. Like I said, when you get a number of these sisters out here, and you got some white women talking about what they're going to do when they don't get their food. Well, first of all, when you have Section 8 and you bragging, I know there was one YouTuber bragging that he was on Section 8 and he was trying to compare Section 8 to somebody working for the government and getting a check, a pension check after 20 years of serving in the military or working for the government. A pension check is not welfare. In fact, as a person, and I've worked for the government, I paid taxes. I spent the time to get the pension. A pension is something you can get for the rest of your life. Welfare, Section 8, is something that you can't get for the rest of your life. And you have a number of people who are proud to get food stamps. Well, to me, when I hear a number of these black women talk about food stamps, that tells me where their minds are. And some of the white women out there too. These are individuals who are inept, lazy. They want somebody else to pay for their kids. In fact, the more the welfare state expands, the more irresponsibility you have out there. And this is why a number of women talk about they don't need a man, because there's always big daddy government to take care of them. And that's the big problem right there. But you have mostly the men who are funding all these programs because the men make most of the money. Although I hear that women make up the majority of the labor force, maybe 51%, but you have to look at what types of jobs women are doing and what types of jobs men are doing. Men are doing more of the hazardous jobs. That's why they get paid more. So even though you may have more women working, women still make less money. They're not making you have a lot more male millionaires, billionaires than women. But you have a number of women crying about what they're not getting. And what it is, and this is where I need a husband. You need a husband. They're talking about what the man isn't giving him. I saw a video the other day. There was this white woman on it, and this white woman said, "Well, I'm not going to give my husband any sex. I'm not going to. He's got to do the dishes. I don't want to hear you complaining about doing work, coming home from work." And she said, "I deserve something because I've been here all day." Well, what were you doing all day? See, this is a problem too. We've allowed a lot of women to just run their mouths and really have nothing to say. And this is what's going on with the protests. When you ask the protesters, you say, "Okay, why are you protesting?" They say, "Well, Trump is a fascist." Then you ask that follow-up question. Well, how is Trump a fascist? They don't know. Or then they will get an attitude and they'll say, "Well, you get out of here," because they don't have an answer. And this is the problem when you have a lot of people who are ignorant, they're protesting, they don't know anything about politics. Just like black people didn't know a damn thing about Charlie Kirk, but they thought they could speak on it. And I, like I said, for you black people here on YouTube, most of you, except for a, a few of us, stick to your relationship stuff. Don't deal with any politics because you don't know history, you don't know politics. All you're doing is regurgitating what you hear from CNN, what you hear from a college professor. You don't dig deep enough. Many of you have never been out of your own city. Many of you, you don't even know what the three branches of government are. You don't even know what kind of issues you have in your community. Why? Because if you know the issues in your community, something would change, but they'll never change. Why? Because in a black community, there are no men. First of all, you need stable men. But the problem is, when we hear, I know Anton had a video on where this millennial was saying, well, the men in the past, they failed us. Well, some of them did. But you have to look at the men in the past. The men in the past were taking care of other women's kids. The men in the past, some of them were drunken and they didn't do anything for themselves. Some of the women were bad. The feminism, just to name a few. Of course, the drugs in the community, the welfare, voting for one party. That's what has happened to a number of black people. I mean, the churches are fucked up now. They failed the education system. When you don't have stability, the bottom line is you're going to have chaos in your community. Again, black people did well during Jim Crow. But when it came to integration, and I believe integration would have still happened, but the white liberals darling Martin Luther King through communism. And everybody knows Martin Luther King. This is why I don't celebrate Martin Luther King. I believe Malcolm X was a better leader, but Malcolm X didn't get the exposure that Martin Luther King got. Martin Luther King, again, with the Poor People's Campaign. And the reason why I bring up the Poor People's Campaign is if you look at Black Lives Matter, they took a lot of their information from the Poor People's Campaign. In fact, again, the Black Panther movement, Black nationalism, it's all engulfed in communism. And when you see this fist like this, it's not black power. It's communism. And communism is always going to hold you back. That's why black people are always going to be at the bottom. And then when another black gets ahead, what happens is you get other blacks trying to pull him down. Sometimes they'll kill him because of the jealousy. Same with the black women. And in fact, going back, know the guy's name. It's Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater and Lyndon B. Johnson. Barry Goldwater, when he was running against Lyndon B. Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson used the fact that Barry Goldwater, during the Brown versus Board of Education court case, this is when all the racism started. He took what Barry Goldwater said when it came to a federal matter. Said, well, federal matters don't need to be involved in state issues. And Lyndon B. Johnson, the Great Society, particularly gave black women welfare, told black, it's alleged, I'm going to say it's alleged. He said, I'm going to have you Negroes voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Well, some may have been right about that because the majority of black people, even though Donald Trump won. And so here's the basis. When it comes to white people, they vote about 50-50. So what generally tips the scales to the Democratic Party has been the black vote. This is why you get a number of people out there going into black churches trying to sway black voters to vote for the Democratic candidate. Because when you vote for the Democratic candidate these days, what are you voting for? You're voting for Marxism. You're voting for communism. You're voting for tyrannical government. And again, not picking on the black women, but they were going around telling you how educated they were. Well, just because you have a degree, it doesn't mean you're educated. It means you were taught in a curriculum that you study and got a diploma for. But a number of you, I guarantee, when you majored in something, you didn't work with what you majored in. You got jobs with the government. And the reason why a number of black women are having a hard time finding jobs is because they work for the government. They don't work in the private sector too much. Why? Because they can't run the bullshit in the private sector that they can in the government. And they're not going to get promoted in the private sector like they're going to get in the government. There's more competition in the private sector, where in the government, all you have to have is a pussy and titties, and you'll be on board easily. But when it comes to a dick and balls out here, well, it's always been harder for men to get in. That's why I, in my humble opinion, I will not help a lot of women in the STEM unless they understand what's going on. You're not going to get a free ride. Now, if you are a woman and you're interested in STEM, and I see that you can do it, and you're doing it because you want to do it, you're not doing it because your mama told you that you can do anything a boy can or your daddy told you, okay. But if you're doing it to try to prove that you're better or equal to men, no, I'm not going to help you. I'm gonna fuck you all over. Because I believe that. And if you women need to understand something, the reason why you're in a hole now is because you let feminism. Feminism has destroyed your families. It's destroyed your kids. It's really destroyed your minds. Feminism is another Marxist movement. It's told you that you are powerful, but you don't have any power. It's giving you this illusion that you can basically tell men what to do. No, you can't. What's happening is the elite men are using women to basically castrate the peasant men, so the peasant men don't take over the elitists. That's all it is. But see, if you were smart enough, you would have known some of this. A lot of you aren't smart enough. That's why I said, when I hear you all crying about EBT cards, first of all, you're lucky to be getting something. In fact, if they take some of the EBT away, it might give you this thought. Don't have kids unless you can afford them, and don't have kids with the wrong person. And that's the problem. That's why we have hoods. And then that man that said Gen X and the baby boomers and the silent generation failed them. Well, they didn't actually fail them. Well, some of them did. Some of them did. But look who raised a lot of these niggas out here. Women. A number of these men are complaining like women. And then you did have some men to try to teach some of these young men something, but they don't want to listen. They will listen to social media. It's just like a number of sisters out there. Sisters will listen to that pastor. They'll listen to everybody but their own man. And that's why when it comes to women, I hear Leslie Jones saying, well, you men don't know how to fuck right. Not that the men don't know how to fuck right. He might not be attracted to you. And see, with a lot of these sisters, when they don't have an argument, they love to go on the size of a man's penis. it has to be something sexual. Well, he might need Viagra to fuck you. But the bottom line is, this is what that I'm talking about with some of the sisters. They have that white supremacist mind where they are superior. I heard one black woman say that she has all these options. She's going to date other races, which is fine. But the minute a black man does it, you have an issue. Because a lot of you sisters under feminism, you think you can control the black man. So you try to use that reverse psychology like it's us trying to control you. No. In every society, if you look at it, the men are respected whether they're right or wrong, except in the black community. Everybody knows it. Well, that's because black men and black women politically, they're diametrically different. And this is what I believe for the most part. You all should avoid each other unless you have individuals that have common knowledge. And when I mean something common interest. I mean, here the westernized woman is getting more and more left anyway. That's a big issue. And because she's getting more and more left, she really thinks she's going somewhere. Well, this is why they don't like Donald Trump. He's making changes. The changes you don't like. You see, sometimes you can skate, and you're going along, you're comfortable with skating, all of a sudden you run into a hole, you trip over something. It's because you got too comfortable. And see, when we have all these programs, these government programs, you have people living on these government programs. See, the programs are not made for individuals to have a lifestyle. It's temporary help. But you have individuals who believe that government programs are lifelong benefits. And I hear women up there saying, well, this man should the taxpayer should take care of her and her 7 kids. No, we shouldn't. No, we shouldn't. When you have these welfare states, that decreases responsibility. That's why you have the I don't need a man syndrome. It's what it is. I mean, we live in days that, yeah, it's powerful. We have people talking about the tariffs. Well, essentially, I did hear that Trump wants to give $14,000 to $2,000. Essentially. Well, if that's true, that's giving back some money. He's trying to make the economy work, but the Democrats keep on pushing back. And when they're pushing back, the bottom line is the Democrats, they really want people to be on the plantation. The Democrats are not your friends, except maybe you got John Fetterman. The only one up there with some sense. I mean, I see people like Pocahontas and Globuchar. They're sitting up there lying. And that's why women shouldn't be running anything. Women go to government. Women just, what they believe in and what men believe in, women believe in stupid shit for the most part. That's why they shouldn't be running anything. And no, they say, well, take them back in the kitchen. No, they're not even good for the kitchen. They're good being left out there on the sidelines. Most of them. They're good for HT, a human toilet. And I'm not hating women, but that's what most of you are good for. You think just because you have a baby that makes you relevant. Carrying the baby is one thing. What do you do when a baby is here? Many of you don't want the kids. You want somebody to pay for the kids, and it's not you. And that's that liberal mindset. You want somebody to give you something for nothing. And that's why Americans are lost. This is why a number of you are out there protesting. You don't even know what you're protesting for because you don't understand history. You don't understand the government. You only understand what you've been told because you're gullible. Don't look up anything. You don't care to look up anything because a number of you are selfish and delusional. A number of you have lead in your ass. The lies, the emotion, the assumption, the deceit, the deception, the delusion. Look at Kendra G. Think she's the prize. It's a number of sisters. You're not the, first of all, the women aren't the prize. They're only the prize when we simp for them. But if a man has his head on right, he has options. But it shouldn't be based on money. And that's the problem with sex in America. It's all a commodity. It's for the highest bidder. In other words, if it's not out of intimacy, it's no good anyway. And on TV, that's all they put on. They're putting on same sex, they're putting on heterosexual, they're putting on gross stuff on TV. Well, I don't watch a lot of TV. Sports is becoming entertainment. And you know, they're putting all this flag football out to try to get women involved. These women don't know anything about football. You look at all these sports announcers. 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have women announcers on the field. Now we got them on the field. Now we got them on NFL Network thinking that they know something about some football. The only ones who really knew about football were people like Susie Colbert, and I think her name was Andrea Kramer. She knew about, and then she used to work in Baltimore on Channel 13, Andrea Kirby. She knew about sports. And then you have so many other ones who are in college basketball, like Cheryl Miller. She knows about basketball. A lot of these other women out here, they don't know about sports. In fact, they're only out there for men to look at. And regardless of all of the equality, everything that the women want, men are still looking at you for how good you look. They don't care about your brain because many of you don't use it right anyway. They care about seeing you naked, but they care about. That's why they simp for you. And generally they simp for you because they don't have confidence in themselves. So they believe they have to throw out their wallet. Now the women are trying to do the same thing. It's not working. So in the meantime, I'm saying this. When you live in the lies, when you live in the emotion, the assumption, the delusion, the deception, and the deceit, you're always going to be disappointed. You live one time. But when it comes to America, we have too many dummies out here for voting. And I'm hoping Trump ends mail-in voting. And again, you red states, go on and do redistricting. Democrats do it. And see, it's funny when the Democrats do it, oh, it's all right. But when Republicans do it, it's a problem. We got double standards. Just like we look at men and women. If men have standards, he's sassy. If women do it, she's a feminist. That's the problem. That's shaming language. We need to get rid of all the shaming language because that's all it is. The bottom line is it's about what you do, not what you say. Now, you can disagree with everything I say. That's fine. I'm not here to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm here to give you the information. And I'm giving you information based on as I see it, but I watch the news and I look at what's going on with CNN. And I also look at what's going on Fox. I mean, I think media is the worst information. You need to look it up for yourself. I believe ground.com is one of the best sources because you get it from the left, you get it from the right, but that tells you The mainstream media is all, it's not news. It's opinion. It's all it is. But again, when you can keep America stupid, that's what the Democrats really want. They want to keep America stupid, but they want to act like they care about you. And really, they don't care about you. Like I said, the unions want the money. That's why that's why they want the government open. Because when the federal workers aren't working, getting a paycheck, unions not getting paid because unions based on membership. So in the meantime, it's going to say this. Understand what's going on with history. Understand what's going on around you. Every news source is not going to tell you the truth. Understand what I told you about the continuing resolution, because you don't need college to become educated. College doesn't make you educated. It just gives you an extra layer for working for somebody else. If you're a man, you don't need to go to college. You don't need all that debt unless you want to be an engineer or something. If you want to go to college, you don't have to go to Harvard, MIT. Get the bang for your buck and get into something marketable. And understand what's going on with your politicians. Because the Democrats, again, it's their fault that the government is shut down because they're not getting their way. They're having a temper tantrum. Because in the end, when it comes to Americans, many of them don't know what's going on. And that's why they live in lies. They have so much emotion. They believe the assumptions. They're delusional. They believe in deception and deceit. You have a number of people out here who are going to be voting. So I'm going to tell you, between now and the midterms, get educated, get informed, and understand that in this country, it's not left versus right, liberal versus conservative. It's freedom versus tyranny, and it's good versus evil. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 401 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some STEM content, check out the QCIS channel. Well, on that channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, here's where you can find me. For the 401 Talk Zone radio show channel, you can find me right here on YouTube. You can find me on X, formerly Twitter, Rumble, and of course, Truth Social. And for the QCIS channel, you can find me on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and of course, LinkedIn. And with this content that I deliver tonight, I don't want anybody to be offended, but if you are offended, then you need to change something in your life. What I'm here to do is bring out the truth, that you know what's going on. Yes, I will give you my opinion, but I'm going to tell you exactly where I get it from. And I'm not repeating talking points. I just understand the real world around me, how hard the real world is. And for individuals, you're in all these materials. You want to go steal because you're not getting your EBT? Well, you go ahead and do that. Have a felony. Stay in jail. Well, you want the taxpayers to Pay for your 3 hots in the cot as well. Don't be stupid out there, because that's what's running this country. There are too many stupid people behind the microphone. And watch the jealousy. Don't show everybody what you got, because in the end, you have a number of people who want what you got because they don't want to get up and do anything for themselves because they believe that they can have what you have. You look at all these stores getting robbed out here. This is why things are high now, because they have to pay for loss prevention. But people keep saying it's the tariffs. Yeah, Trump has only been in power for 9 months. Biden was here for 4 years, let all these immigrants in. He's trying to clean up 4 years of what Biden did. Be patient. Because in the end, be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Always know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, then change it. And once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. But you all have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.